She stepped out into the warm summer afternoon expecting to be home within minutes, unaware it would be the last ordinary decision she would ever make. 16-year-old Emily Carter lived in a quiet riverside town where streets curved gently past parks, footpaths, and familiar faces. She came from a warm, creative household. Her parents were supportive, deeply involved in her life, and proud of her independence. Emily loved photography, music, and long walks that helped her clear her head. That afternoon, her plan was simple: a short walk along her usual route, headphones in, sunlight filtering through the trees, then back home for dinner. She left the house just after 4 o'clock. The air was calm, the kind of stillness that made the day feel endless. Neighbors later recalled seeing her pass by, relaxed and unhurried, dressed casually, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Nothing about her behavior suggested fear, urgency, or concern. This was a path she had walked dozens of times before. What Emily didn't know was that someone else had noticed her. Several minutes behind her, a man followed the same route. He kept his distance, blending into the background of a normal weekday afternoon. Traffic passed. Cyclists moved by. Life continued uninterrupted. No one paid attention to the quiet alignment of two strangers moving in the same direction. Cameras mounted along the streets later captured the final confirmed images of Emily. She appeared calm, occasionally checking her phone, her pace steady. In the footage, she turned back toward home, retracing her steps along the riverside path. Behind her, partially obscured by passing pedestrians, the man appeared again, always just far enough back to avoid notice. Emily never changed her speed. She never looked over her shoulder. When she didn't return home that evening, her parents assumed she had stopped to see a friend or lost track of time. But as the light faded and her phone went unanswered, unease crept in. By nightfall, concern turned into fear. Police were contacted, and within hours, the search began. Officers retraced her route, checked nearby streets, and reviewed early camera footage. There were no signs of a struggle. No dropped belongings. No witnesses who remembered anything unusual. Emily had simply vanished. By morning, the quiet town was filled with flashing lights, officers, and volunteers. Dogs were brought in. The river was searched. Every minute of camera footage was examined again and again. Slowly, investigators reconstructed her final movements, and noticed something chilling. She had not been alone. As the pieces began to align, one question haunted everyone involved: how could someone disappear so completely, in daylight, without a sound? By dawn, the disappearance was no longer treated as a simple case of a teenager running late. The air around Emily Carter's home was thick with tension as officers came and went, asking careful questions, taking notes, retracing assumptions that were already beginning to fall apart. Emily's parents sat side by side at the kitchen table, barely touching the cups of coffee growing cold in front of them. They answered every question the same way: Emily was responsible, predictable, cautious. She didn't wander off. She didn't vanish without warning. Something had gone wrong. Investigators focused on her walking route first. It was familiar, well-used, and considered safe. That fact made her disappearance even more unsettling. Officers canvassed the area, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual the previous afternoon. The answers were all the same: no screams, no arguments, no sudden movements. Just another quiet summer day. Attention quickly turned to CCTV. Hours of footage were reviewed frame by frame. Cameras showed Emily leaving home, passing shops, crossing streets. Everything appeared normal, until analysts noticed a man entering the frame behind her more than once. He didn't walk beside her. He didn't interact. He stayed just far enough back to appear coincidental. But coincidences don't repeat themselves so precisely. Time stamps revealed he followed the same turns, crossed the same roads, and remained on her route for several minutes. When Emily turned back toward home, so did he. Investigators replayed the footage in silence, the room heavy with realization. The last camera caught Emily near a secluded stretch of the riverside path. Trees thickened there, blocking the view from nearby streets. The man appeared again, closer this time. Then the footage ended. No camera showed Emily after that point. Search efforts intensified immediately. Hundreds of officers and volunteers flooded the area. Dogs tracked her scent to the edge of the river, then stopped. Divers were brought in. Boats scanned the water. Helicopters circled overhead. Every possible location was searched with urgency that bordered on desperation. Still, there were no signs of a struggle. No witnesses came forward. It was as if Emily had been erased. Investigators began building a profile of the man from the footage. His clothing, his gait, the times he appeared and disappeared from view. Transit records, local cameras, and movement patterns were cross-checked. Slowly, an identity emerged. The man was Daniel Reed. He lived alone. He had no stable employment. And as detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a past far darker than anyone expected. Years earlier, in another country, Reed had been convicted of a violent killing. After serving his sentence, he moved, slipping through gaps in international record systems that failed to alert local authorities. More troubling still, he had once been arrested locally for assault. The case never went to trial. No one had connected the dots. As police prepared to bring him in for questioning, another chilling development occurred. Daniel Reed vanished too. His apartment was empty. His phone inactive. He had left behind personal items but no explanation. To investigators, it felt like history repeating itself, another person gone without warning. But this time, they knew they were looking for someone capable of anything. And somewhere, beneath the surface of the calm, slow-moving river, the truth was waiting. The river became the center of everything. By the third day, search teams lined both banks from early morning until dusk. Divers entered the water in slow, methodical patterns, feeling along the silted bottom where visibility dropped to nothing within inches. The river looked peaceful from the surface, its current gentle, almost deceptive. Beneath it, tangled weeds and debris formed a maze that could hide almost anything. Police believed Emily's disappearance had ended here. Dogs had tracked her scent to a narrow opening along the riverbank, a place shielded by trees and brush. It was close enough to the walking path to reach quickly, yet hidden enough that no one passing by would notice what happened there. Investigators believed this was where the man finally closed the distance. They reconstructed the moment carefully. No signs of a chase. No evidence of a struggle spilling onto the path. The theory was chillingly simple: Emily had been caught off guard, silenced quickly, before she could react or call for help. What followed, investigators believed, was deliberate and calculated. As the search continued, details about Daniel Reed's past surfaced publicly, sending shockwaves through the community. Years earlier, he had taken a life overseas and served time for it. Somehow, that conviction never appeared in local systems. Even after his later arrest for assault, no full background check had been triggered. Parents watched the news with growing dread. The idea that someone with such a history had been living unnoticed among them was almost as frightening as Emily's disappearance itself. Then came the discovery that shifted the case forever. A diver felt something unnatural beneath the water, weighty, wrapped, held down. When the object was carefully brought to the surface, the atmosphere along the riverbank changed instantly. Officers turned away. Some stood frozen. Others lowered their heads. Emily had been found. She had been hidden with deliberate effort, weighted to keep her beneath the surface. Investigators believed Reed had returned to the river more than once, ensuring she would not resurface. It was an act that spoke not of panic, but of cold intent. The town fell silent as the news spread. Vigils appeared along the river that night, candles flickering, flowers lining the path she had walked so many times. Emily's family was shielded from cameras, their grief private and immeasurable. But one question still remained unanswered. Where was Daniel Reed? As authorities prepared warrants and expanded the manhunt, they feared he might flee again, or worse, that he might harm someone else. Officers worked around the clock, tracking financial records, transportation logs, and remote locations he might choose to hide. They would not have to wait long. Because just days after Emily was found, the search for Daniel Reed came to a sudden, final end. The call came in just after sunrise. A maintenance worker had reported an unattended vehicle parked near a remote service road miles outside town. It had been there overnight, engine cold, doors locked. At first, it seemed insignificant. But when officers ran the plates, the tension in the room shifted instantly. The vehicle belonged to Daniel Reed. Police moved carefully. The area was quiet, surrounded by fields and low trees, far from homes or foot traffic. Several patrol cars blocked the road as officers approached, weapons drawn, unsure of what they would find, or if Reed was still alive. Inside the vehicle, they found him. Daniel Reed was dead. Authorities determined he had taken his own life sometime during the night. There was no note. No explanation. No final statement. For investigators, the discovery brought a complex mix of relief and frustration. The immediate threat was gone. But so was the possibility of hearing him speak, of forcing him to answer for what he had done in a courtroom, of hearing him explain why he chose Emily, why he followed her, why he acted. Emily's family learned the news quietly, away from cameras. There would be no arrest photo, no trial, no verdict read aloud. Justice, in its most visible form, would never come. Still, the evidence spoke clearly. Forensic analysis confirmed what investigators already believed. Fibers, traces, and timing all pointed to Reed as the only possible person responsible. The CCTV footage placed him behind Emily. His movements aligned with the window of her disappearance. Evidence showed he had returned to the river after the crime, taking deliberate steps to hide what he had done. There was no doubt. As details emerged, public anger shifted toward the system that had failed to stop him. How had a man with a violent past, one that included a killing abroad, been allowed to live unnoticed? Why hadn't his previous arrest triggered deeper checks? Why had warnings gone unseen? Questions echoed through press conferences and town meetings. Emily's name became more than a headline. She became a symbol of innocence lost, and of gaps that should never have existed. The case was officially closed without a trial. But its impact was only beginning. Because what happened to Emily Carter would not be allowed to fade quietly into memory. In the days that followed, the town moved as if under a heavy fog. Emily Carter's walk to the river became a quiet procession of flowers, candles, handwritten notes, and photographs. People who had never met her stood in silence along the path, trying to understand how something so carefully hidden could have happened in plain daylight. Parents walked closer to their children. Routines felt fragile. For Emily's family, time stopped completely. They spoke publicly only once, thanking search teams and asking for privacy. There was no anger in their words, only exhaustion and grief. The absence of a trial left a strange emptiness. No courtroom. No cross-examination. No sentence spoken aloud. Just facts, final and irreversible. Behind the scenes, investigators continued working. Though the suspect was gone, the case demanded answers. How had Daniel Reed entered the country without his past following him? Why hadn't his previous conviction appeared during later police encounters? Why had an earlier arrest not triggered deeper scrutiny? The answers were uncomfortable. Reed's violent history had been fragmented across borders, stored in systems that did not speak to one another. His earlier offense abroad remained invisible to local authorities. When he was later arrested for assault, there was no automatic international check. No warning flag. No alarm. Emily's case forced those failures into the open. Internal reviews began almost immediately. Law enforcement agencies worked with government officials to examine how background checks were handled for foreign nationals after arrest. The findings were blunt, gaps existed, and they were dangerous. Public pressure grew. Emily's name was spoken in council chambers, legislative hearings, and policy briefings. Her story became the reason behind new procedures, expanded data sharing, improved international cooperation, mandatory checks that could no longer be bypassed by geography. Change came slowly, but it came. For the community, the river no longer felt the same. What once symbolized calm now carried memory. Some avoided it altogether. Others walked it deliberately, as if reclaiming space that fear had tried to take. There were still questions that would never be answered. Why Emily? Why that moment? Why that path? Those answers died with Daniel Reed. But one truth remained undeniable: what happened was not just the result of one man's actions, but of a system that failed to see him clearly. And that realization would shape everything that followed. In time, the headlines faded, but Emily Carter did not. Her bedroom remained untouched for months, sunlight still falling across the photographs she had taken, the notebooks she filled with ideas, the life she had been building piece by piece. For her parents, grief did not arrive all at once. It settled slowly, in quiet moments, in an empty chair at dinner, in the silence of a phone that would never buzz again. There was no courtroom reckoning, no final statement from the person responsible. But there was certainty. The evidence left no room for doubt. Emily had been followed, taken by surprise, and silenced by someone who should never have been invisible to authorities. The town learned to live with what it knew. New procedures were put in place. International records began to travel more freely between systems. Background checks became harder to avoid. Each policy change carried an unspoken truth: it had come too late for one family, but not for others. Along the river, a small plaque was installed near the path. It didn't describe what happened. It didn't mention fear or loss. It simply bore Emily's name and a single line about kindness, creativity, and the quiet joy of ordinary days. People still walk that route. Some do it cautiously. Others do it deliberately, refusing to surrender familiar ground to what once happened there. Children laugh again in the nearby park. Life, impossibly, continues. But Emily's story lingers, not as a warning rooted in fear, but as a reminder of responsibility. Of the cost of overlooked information. Of how ordinary moments can carry unimaginable weight. She left home expecting to return. And though she didn't, her story changed how others are protected, how systems speak, and how silence is challenged. Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes, it arrives in the changes made afterward, and in the promise that a quiet walk home should never end in darkness.